Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special guest, Charlotte Goodwin. Charlotte, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, not a problem. I always like to tell people where I found them. So I actually found you on Twitter or X, several weeks ago. I saw your book cover. I think it was like somebody I knew like must have shared it, and I was like, "Oh, that's really cool." And then it was funny because I kind of had you in my back pocket for a minute, and then I had a friend actually recommend book one to me, which I thought was really cool. So that's where I was like, I got to get a hold of Charlotte. So I just feel like that's kind of serendipitous, right? So that's when I messaged you. So I thank you so much for, responding back and for coming on today. I can't wait to talk about, your books and your writing experience and have a good chat. So
Cool, thank you.
yeah, no problem. So we'll start right there with that first question. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
It has been a very long learning curve, I guess. So I wrote my very first book probably about 12 years ago when I was bored at work. I had to look busy. I didn't have much work to do, so I thought, I'll write a novel. But it wasn't the best. I tried to get it published, didn't get published, and then I gave up writing for a long time until 4 years ago when I was in a very different job and I was bored again. So there's a bit of a trend here. So I started writing again. It was interesting because I'd just been on holiday and I'd been doing a lot of reading on holiday, and I don't get much time to read these days. I used to read loads when I was younger, and it kind of like re-inspired me to kick off on a story that had been rattling around my head pretty much since I'd wrote that first book all those years ago. So I came back and I thought, well, I know I can do it. I kept trying to do things at work, like come up with good ideas and initiatives, and I kept being told to get back in my box. So I thought, well, if you don't want me to use my time for work, I'll use it for something else. And I started writing my book, and that was in October of that year. What would it have been? 2021, I think. And by Christmas of that year, I'd finished the first draft, and that
Wow.
was the first draft of The Queen of Vaughan. So I did that. Then I wrote its two sequels, and they were done by the spring. And I I guess I just got really excited, and I thought, these are really good. And then I got people to read it, like friends and family and stuff, and they gave me feedback and they said, yeah, it's good. And I got all deluded into thinking it was good, but I had doubts. So
I get that.
I paid a professional editor to give it a manuscript review, and she said it was pants. So I parked it because I just wasn't ready to do a complete rewrite, and I wrote a sequel trilogy. So I started with the Homecoming trilogy, and then I wrote the Offspring trilogy, which, as the name suggests, is about the offspring of the characters from the first trilogy. And it's set about 20 years later. And I wrote that trilogy, and I thought, yeah, this is much better than the first trilogy. And I thought, well, it kind of stands alone, a bit like Star Wars episodes 4, 5, 6. And so I thought, I'm going to start with this trilogy. And I released that trilogy, and you know what? It did all right. By indie author standards, I sold several hundred copies and it was doing okay. But I had a few doubts about that first book in that second trilogy. So I decided to unpublish it, and I was going to start again. And I thought, no, I'm going to start again with the first trilogy, but I'm going to do a whole overhaul of the whole three books. And I did a massive edit of The Queen of Vaughan, and then I got another manuscript review, and then I did another edit, and then I got a few more sort of reads from various people, and I tweaked it, and I tweaked it, and I eventually published that one a few weeks ago, and now I've unpublished it. But to answer the sort of question of what it's been like up until this point, I said a very long learning curve, but it's also quite addictive because I think once I created my characters, they just made me keep writing about them. And they just wouldn't leave me alone, and I had to tell their stories. So I did it, and then even though I don't really like editing particularly, I just kept doing all the editing because I wanted to make my books. good. And then I ended up spending lots of money on editors, so it's cost me a lot of money. And yeah, learned so much. I could talk about this all day, but I think that more or less summarizes the answer to that first question.
You said so many great things there. Um, First of all, I'm jealous of anybody going to work and being bored because I'm a teacher and it was like I wish today or this week had been boring before my interviews, but it's just been like emergency meeting after emergency meeting and stuff to do. I'm like, I looked at my friend who has a different career than me, and I'm like, what are you doing? He's like in IT, and he works at like an insurance company, and he's like protecting the information. And there's like times right where I'm like, my job's a little bit more boring, and he'll be like, oh my God, it's like he's in war games, like battling, like thieves trying to take, everybody's like social security or something. So it's actually more exciting at times, I think, than he wants to. But that's awesome. I totally agree though. It's so funny. Like I had a job that was similar to that before as a teacher. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was like, they didn't really want me to do anything. So I was like, I'm gonna do some writing. And back then I was like, I had a journal. So I would just like, bring the pen and paper and I would go home and type. I had my wife's like, what are these? And that's from the time I have like a stack of them of just like, half finished stories of like 20, 30,000 words. It was wild. So in terms of, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of layer some of my secondary questions in with a couple of these other ones because it says some awesome stuff there for that first one. And I want to make sure that we're dissecting that properly so our audience can learn from that. I always call this like a journeyman's podcast. A lot of people here like, similar boat, right? Like publishing 1 to 6 books is kind of cool. We used to be like 1 to 3, I think, and now we like expanded into a lot of people have done more than that. So that's like really exciting. But I want to kind of go back into the next question. What genre or genres do you currently write in and why?
I write fantasy, and I've pretty much always written fantasy. And the main reason, other than the fact that I like reading fantasy, is I can just make stuff up. So with so many other genres, I do love reading historical fiction, but I would never write historical fiction because I would have to do so much research to get it right.
Yeah.
Whereas the great thing about fantasy, I can just make up my own worlds and my own rules and my own universes. And the only like research I've ever done is like little things like just trying to understand swords and different kinds of swords and how they're wielded and a little bit about horse riding and a little bit about things like how long does it take to go somewhere on a sailing ship.
Yeah.
But other than those kind of details, I've not had to do any research. And I also love the possibilities that you can have with fantasy because anything's possible. And
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can just be as imaginative as you like, and you can just create these entire universe and entire worlds and all kinds of stuff, which just is I really enjoy because I just like love making stuff up. And the wackier the better for me.
Yeah, that's fair. But I always have people, I'm a history teacher. They're like, why don't you do historical fiction? I'm like, I love history, but like now I've been doing like urban fantasy or historical urban fantasy, as I'm calling it. Because I got like urban fantasy, but I got like older stories that take place in like ancient times or something, like the origin of like my monster hunting clan. Or I have like this Aztec descended vampire like huntress, and I'm like, ooh, what are her ancestors like, in terms of the Aztec Empire? So I'd love to do stuff like that, but again, right, there's like you're only doing so much research, right? My friend, he goes, "You're just a lazy researcher." I guess, like there's only so much, but like you said, like there's certain things I want to research, right? Or there's certain things I want to do, and I agree with you. I think fantasy, in general really gives you, I love fantasy because it's easier for me to write than urban fantasy because I can just make anything up and having like the background for history and like studying different societies, cultures, or, different types of enduring issues or something. I feel like it's easier for me to kind of expand quicker, and make like a better story quicker, if that makes sense in fantasy. Because I agree with you because of the reason that, you can really just make anything up and, it fits the way you want to fit. So, and then if it doesn't, right, you can kind of squeeze it into its own box. So I totally agree. It's just more fun. Sorry, people. It just is. So, um, I was just curious, like, what were some of your inspirations in terms of fantasy or maybe certain authors or series where you're like, I got to do this, like, and in particularly within this genre?
I guess I think the very first fantasy book I remember reading, or I think more accurately was read to me, was when I was at primary school, or I guess you call it elementary school over your side. And the teacher read us The Hobbit. it was like a class reader where we all sat there and we read
Oh,
it.
that's cool.
And I really enjoyed the story. And so then off my own back, I went and read Lord of the Rings. And I think those two books are what really got me into the fantasy genre. And I read quite a few of the classic authors like Raymond D. Feist, and Robin Hobb, and a lot of the sort of famous names, and really sort of enjoyed their stories. I used to read so much when I was younger, and then for a long time I didn't read very much. More recently, I've been reading a bit from Joe Abercrombie. I've enjoyed his books, and although I know he's had a bit of bad press lately, his books are still good. I did read Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman recently, which was a really sort of interesting story. So I guess those ones are probably sort of my influences. I think traditional with the sort of Lord of the Rings style setting, the medieval fantasy setting, and the elves and the dwarves and the goblins. I don't have orcs in my stories, but I kind of have those kind of characters, which are probably broadly based on Tolkien style races. So, and it is my sort of fantasy setting, very much a sort of medieval style fantasy setting. So, sort of quite traditional in that respect.
Oh, that's cool. Now you brought up another question for me. Like I know personally, like there's two different things I like to do as an author and a reader. There's like sometimes I like to do that more traditional. Like I have one world that is called for me like Leanna. It's more traditional. Yeah, your traditional elves, dwarves, whatever. Like I just want the reader to be like, come in and I just tweak a few things, right? But then with the races or their cultures or whatever, but elves are elves, your typical woodland, I would say. But then I have my other stuff. I have another world that I've just basically I like to experiment and do things with. So I have my elves in that world are actually half plant. So I always wondered like why don't elves sleep? Why do Tolkien's elves like why are they vegetarian? Like those kind of things. And I'm like, ooh, what if they were plant? And then what if they had chloroplasts in their skin? So I tend to in that world I tend to evolve things quite a bit. And I have like rock I have dwarves that actually are part rock. That's why they're almost like half rock elemental, half dwarf. And I created like my own thing. So I'm curious, like, for people that enjoy kind of like those classical, races and, cultures within, those fantasy tropes, what was it about, like, what is it still about your elves or those different races that, you know, sometimes I find it hard to write traditionally with them and still make them unique. So I was just kind of curious, what were some things maybe you did to try and make, your different races or different peoples unique, even if it was a fantasy trope?
So, with my stories, it's not so much the characters that are unique, it's a setting. So in my story or my sort of series, the concept is that there is a planet far, far away that instead of having a magnetic field, it has a magic field. And it kind of I'd sort of end up giving away some of the little Easter eggs that get dropped right at the very end. But to there's actually a good reason why it seems very much like Tolkien, and I kind of hint at why that is right at the very end.
Cool.
but
That's
but
awesome.
the concept is there's a magical planet and it has these traditional Tolkien style races for a specific reason, which I don't want to give away because I'd spoil it. And
Keep going.
there's
I bought book one.
and there's some aliens in this world who watch, a little bit like sort of Vulcan, Star Trek. They observe planets in these spaceships. And there's one, and these spaceships observe all the inhabited planets. So there's one that observes life on Earth. There's one that's observing the life on this faraway magical planet. And it's one of the aliens aren't supposed to interfere. They have a sort of do no harm mantra. So they're not supposed to harm anybody, damage anything, get involved in any way. But then one day, one of these aliens, she's because they tend to watch high profile characters, so they'll watch royal families and, people that are, I don't know, warlords or whatever, all those kind of people. She happens to be watching this royal family and she sees this little princess being born, and she's a little girl and she's 7 years old and she's very sweet. And this particular alien has become a little bit attached to this little girl because she's been watching her since she was a baby. And when her stepmother tries to assassinate her, she abducts his princess to save her life. And so they end up with a situation of what do we do with this girl? We can't put her back on a planet because she'll get murdered, you know. Everybody thinks she's dead because she was supposedly blown up by magic, and it's just going to upset everything. So they decide to wipe her memories and put her on Earth because it's the only other planet they know of where there's humans. So then she gets raised in the UK on Earth, you know, she gets adopted and she just lives a normal life until years later the aliens decide that they need to send her back because her stepmother is embarking on a crusade of genocide because she wants to wipe out all the goblins, elves, and dwarves for various reasons to do with her backstory. And so they decide, well, we need to send her back to her home planet to try and get her throne back and stop her stepmother being so evil. There's obviously a lot more to it than that, but so yeah, that's kind of the essence of it. So very traditional characters, but a kind of unique setting compared to the other traditional fantasy style novels.
That's super cool. This is also why I think genres personally, I'm like weird. I think they're dumb because I always talk about like the golden compass, right? Like you can find Philip's stuff in young adult, you can find it in fantasy, science fiction, you know, like whatever, right? Like it really can fit anywhere and it really doesn't necessarily fit into one box for any of them, right? So I don't know, because like that's really cool because and I try to tell people, I'm like, really, for me, like, I look at a book. I look at the cover, and if I find it interesting, I'll flip it over to the blurb, and then the blurb's really the one where you have me. And then after that, like, or even those like little quotes too, like on the front. I've had some authors on where they just have like amazing taglines. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And like Maurice Africh had like for Cello's Gate had something like Firefly mixed with Indiana Jones and something else. I was like, you had me at Firefly and Indiana Jones, like any sort of mashup, and it was a science fiction fantasy. And I always have people ask me like, what genre do you read? I'm like, I just read. I'm like, I love fantasy, science fiction, horror. I love the conglomerations. But that's so cool that you were able to really take different aspects of really like several different genres, it sounds like, and then really put them together into a unique story. And that's why I always tell people I don't worry about genre now because if it's a good story to me, it's a good story because I think if you try and fit sometimes into this or that, I don't know, I feel like you really, you know, will miss out on some really great books if you're only worried about just reading a story with just fantasy, or just sci-fi or something like that. That's really cool. I'm just curious, like, what made you decide to go with your set? That sounds so cool, by the way. This magical planet. And I have something that's a little similar for a story I'm writing. So I'm just curious from your aspect, like, how did you go with I want my planet to be like the unique trope? Does that make sense? Like
Hmm.
why'd you pick the setting as the thing that you wanted to be like the most unique thing in terms of like that world building? That's just a really cool idea.
I think that the whole original idea for the story stemmed from the concept of what if I send ordinary people from Earth to a magical, you know, traditional sort of fantasy setting, and it's like
Mm,
how do I go about that? Because Emma's the protagonist, and she's the one that goes there to try and defeat her stepmother. But there's a little bit of nuance to it in that people who are Earth natives have a slight genetic variation to people from my fantasy planet, which is called Dunia, um, in that they have a much greater ability to tap into the magic field than Dunia native humans. So, I mean, it's sort of, I'm not giving too much away because it sort of is revealed quite early on that Emma's evil stepmother is actually originally from Earth, hence why she's a massively powerful sorcerer. So Emma is sent back with her husband, who is an Earth native, and he has to go with her, and he's the one that has to try and learn to become a sorcerer too. So in theory, he can be as powerful as Emma's stepmother, so he can rival her and help her take her throne back. Is the whole sort of concept of it. So, and I think going back to your question, why I wanted to do this, I think it's just me doing with my characters what I guess I'd love to do because I'd love to go to a magical fantasy setting
yeah,
and become an awesome sorcerer or maybe be a long lost queen. You know, I
yeah.
think it'd be amazing if aliens abducted me and told me you're secretly a long lost queen and now you have to reclaim your throne. Or, you know, you're secretly gonna, you know, if you go to this planet, you can be a mega sorcerer. So either Tom or Emma, I would love to be either of them. And obviously I can't be them in real life. So what I can do is write a story where it happens to made up people.
That's so cool. My brother and I like love historical mysteries, and like the ancient astronaut theory to us is just like just fascinating. And we both agree that there's just some weird stuff like in terms of history and questions that we have, and whether or not it's aliens or whether or not, advanced civilizations, like whatever. Like we just think it's so interesting. And for me, being the writer, I'm like, my brain's always going there. So I don't know. To me, like that is a really cool concept. My kids always ask me, right? Here at classes and stuff, they're like, why do you watch this? Why do you believe it? I go, I just like the what ifs. I was like, I love the story, and to think like you could take ancient astronauts and be like, well, why were aliens, if they did come, like, why did they come here? Well, they came here because we're better at magic on their planet, or I don't know, that's just really cool. And it's like such a cool concept, I think, to take that little interesting thread and kind of go that way. That's really neat. I'm also thinking like Superman, right? Does better here than, on Krypton and with their sun and stuff. So that's just super cool. But I think it's such a great example of how you can take something, that, you like, I don't know, it's quite done enough to call it a trope, but like take something that you might have seen, right? And then make it really unique, and then like as a trope and then put it into your story to, give your story so much more flavor. I don't know. I just think that's a really great example of being able to do that. So that's like super, super cool. Man, now I'm wondering, I'm like what type of powers would I have if I, went to that planet or yeah, that's really cool. So do you mind just telling us a little bit, like I know we talked about, started talking about book one, so it's totally fine. Do you mind just kind of giving us your pitch on the Homecoming trilogy just in general?
Yeah, so the first book, which I say, just to sort of clarify, so I released the Queen of Vaughan a few weeks ago, start of May, and I think you're aware of the whole Twitter storm that happened, and partly because of that Twitter storm, and partly just because I had a bit of a rethink about the book, I thought, well, it's got all these bad reviews and whatever, so, but also I thought maybe it's not as good as it could be. Maybe there's some tweaks I could make. So I just decided, no, I'm just going to pull it. So it's going to get a few changes. I'm just doing a little bit of a tweak on it, and I'm going to republish it later. And it's going to have a new name as well, which I haven't 100% decided on. But I think I've decided on a new name for the trilogy, which is going to be called the Stolen Throne trilogy, as
Oh,
opposed to
sweet.
Homecoming trilogy. So it was called the Homecoming trilogy because it was about Emma coming home to Dunia and taking back her throne. But I kind of think that the Stolen Throne trilogy maybe sounds a little bit better, actually. So maybe that's an improvement on it anyway. But the whole trilogy as a whole, as I sort of mentioned, follows Emma's quest to take back her throne over sort of three different books. With the first book primarily be about Emma and Tom getting abducted, coming to terms with the fact that they've got to go on this quest, going to this magical setting, and then having to sort of work out how to get Tom to be a sorcerer. And then the second book moves on from that, and it focuses much more on Tom than Emma. And it's all about the next stages in that. So, well, he's got his power now, and how we're going to use that power to try and take a throne back. Because it's not like you can just walk into a kingdom and suddenly make everybody be loyal to you. So they have to think about that. So they have to build alliances with the dwarves. And there's actually a part of the second book where they realize actually, the way to defeat the queen is perhaps not through war, but with some information. And again, I don't want to give too much away, but they end up having to go back to Earth. So they actually take a character from Dunia, which is Emma's half sister who they've met, and she comes back to Earth with them. So they come back to Earth for a bit, and that's sort of that. And then there is a sort of climax at the end of chapter 2, where they do manage to defeat said evil queen. But the problem is that her son takes over the throne.
Yeah.
So then they have him to defeat in the final book, and things sort of go up a gear in the Emma's starting to build a strength, she's building an army, and now she's having to sort of move forward, but then the attacks on the other races are increasing, the elves come under attack, and there's various other twists and turns that sort of happen in that third book before they finally have the climax in Emma's home country, because she ends up traveling across the whole world. I mean, a lot of the first and the second book, well, in fact, she doesn't even get to her home country until the final book. So they travel all over this sort of world that I've created with various different continents until they ultimately get to the end and get to the climax. So there's kind of three parts to one story. I mean, the stories do stand alone. They do all have a sort of beginning, middle, and end, but they are all part of one bigger story in a way that sort of Lord of the Rings would be. Hence why it's very much a trilogy rather than three sort of separate books. I think if you just read one, you would kind of feel like there was more of the story to tell.
Yeah. Well, it's super cool. Sorry, when you were saying that, I was just like getting really really awesome like Master of the Universe or like He-Man vibes from it too. Because there's just so many cool things in that world that I feel are very similar to what you're saying. So that's really neat. How I had I didn't publish yet, but I was pretty close. So I had a similar type of decision based off of something my editor and then some of my alpha readers had said. Ugh, it's so hard for me, I felt like to pull, but I feel like it was the right decision based off of people that knew more than me that I asked. But like, I'm just curious because again, we're talking about, issues that many writers watch this, thankfully. Thank you everybody for watching. But what really like came down to that decision for you that like I'm gonna pull this versus kind of waiting it out sort of thing? 'Cause I know there are a lot of people that might have done something different. So I'm just curious for you, like why we're like I'm gonna pull this and redo this.
So I think with books, it's very easy to struggle to be objective with your own work. And
Yeah.
as I mentioned earlier, the Queen of Vaughan had an awful lot of reiterations, and I'd done so much work on it, so many rewrites and so many edits that I was kind of the view of it's got to be right now. And to be honest, I don't think it's in a bad state as it sits. And I kind of think that actually, to an extent, the Twitter storm and all the really harsh reviews, I was getting people going into an awful lot of detail about everything that was wrong with my book and giving 1-star reviews. And when I read these reviews, there was actually elements of it that, actually rang true a little bit.
Mm.
And I kind of thought if they weren't writing this book with the viewpoint of I want to destroy this author, which some of them clearly were writing, they might have written the same thing, but with, I don't know, more stars and probably less negativity. So when I saw a lot of these things, and I was even reading some of the good reviews, and even some of the, the good reviews had kind of butts in there, it started making me think, actually, I think this book can be a little bit better. And so what I think happened is I've come to the conclusion this whole Twitter storm for me is a little bit of a blessing in disguise. Because if it hadn't happened, I think what would have happened is I would have got some reasonable reviews, I might have averaged around about 4 stars, maybe, something like that. And I might have thought it's not perfect, but I wouldn't have pulled it. I would have probably thought, well, maybe I can just tweak it slightly and I'll just keep it there. And then I'd have ploughed on and I've released book 2 and book 3. But I think, well, actually, no. Now it's sat there with all these nasty, horrible comments and things on there, and people really laying into it. Maybe this is a chance for a fresh start. And actually, if I put all this behind me, and I do some work on it, and I'm not making massive changes. I'm just sort of deleting a few of the chapters that maybe you've got sidelines in that don't necessarily need to be there, and just streamlining it a little bit better. I'm not sort of fundamentally altering the story per se. I'm just tidying it up a little bit and just making it a little bit more succinct, I think. Then I think actually in the long run, it'll be for the best. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to change the titles, and I'm going to give it a fresh start. And I think to an extent, a mistake that I'm guilty of, and I did it last time with the previous trilogy that I published and then unpublished, in that I kind of rush things because I'm so desperate to get my books out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we all are, and it's
Yeah.
and you put him out there, and then you think, no, maybe that's too soon. And so, frustratingly for this book, just to go off on one of those tangents here, mentioned earlier, is um, I actually decided on the publishing date for this book a year in advance, and I had my editor booked in for this book back in November, and he was supposed to be done by the end of November, and he wasn't done. And long story short, he basically ended up drip feeding me bits of the book, and then I got another editor, and then he ran through it, but he wasn't that good, and then the book wasn't quite as polished as it might have been, and I was rushing to the deadline, even though I shouldn't have been rushing because I planned it so far ahead. Which is again, I think, why some of the errors slipped through the net that shouldn't have done. And I think if any writers are listening to this, I would suggest really, even though I had 42 pre-orders and I thought, this is really good, which was one of my reasons for not wanting to change the publishing date, because if you move it by more than a month, you lose them all on Amazon. Um, you know, just it's much better to sacrifice all those pre-orders and make sure your book's right, because usually you can only launch a book. Well, you can't. You can launch a book as many times as you like, but it's best ideally just to launch it once
Yeah.
and not do what I did and pull it and think I'm gonna have to start again with all this, and I'm not gonna get 42 pre-orders next time. I don't know what I'm gonna get, and I don't know where this is going to end. But yeah, now I've kind of forgotten what your original question was, so I'm
No,
just
no, that was actually perfect. 'Cause I'm curious because like this was like a conversation that I had because I had a situation with my first editor. They were supposed to do developmental edits and they didn't. So, and I was like, hey. And then, yeah, I like the first round wasn't great of what they did do. So I asked a friend and she was like, I was like, who do you know? Because I was like in a bind because I was trying to stay on deadline. And she was like, oh, I'm just going to do it. She's like, I'm just going to do it. She's like, it's a novella. I'm just going to do it. So she did it for me, did an amazing job. Like, but then like my alpha reader feedback came and which was nice. All three of them said the same thing relatively. Well, my two alpha readers said something just a little bit different. Like, I think like everybody said I need a new chapter one, which I definitely like, once they said, I was like, oh yeah, that's fair. And there was just like a bit of character development and stuff. But now it's just like I've fixed so much, like which I'm so glad. But I'm like, oh, instead of just like worrying about getting it out there, which I was, now I'm like, oh, this once I'm done, I was like, people might actually read it, and my goals shifted. But like that first day, man, I was like, when my developmental editor shows, I think, and she's like the queen of developmental editing. She's like, I think you need to do a fifth and sixth draft at least. And I had sent her draft 4.5. I'm like, she goes, I'm so sorry. I'm like, no, it's fine. So that was like a year ago, right? And I've been just making gradual changes. I have like a military veteran helping me because my monster hunter is in the Marines at the time, and I want things to be really good, right? But man, yeah, I was like crushed for like maybe 12 hours, and then I slept, and then my wife and my best friends were like, "You got to listen to people that know more than you." They're like, "You say that all the time to your students, so like you really have." I was like, "No, I'm fine." Like after I slept, I was like, "Okay, let's do this." But like now I'm still like trying to relaunch and stuff. But I think it was like, exactly what I needed to hear because now I've done a lot in the last year that has not just made that story better, but my secondary project. And I have a third project that I go work on sometimes. But yeah, it's not easy, is it, to just be like, isn't something about it's not working and then to have to do that. So I totally feel you there. But I think it is good to point out that, and I think you said a lot of positive things there too. Like, and that's the beauty, I think, of really being indie is like you can make those decisions. If your cover's not great, you can get a new cover, right? If the first round of editing wasn't great, it sucks, but you can find another round of editing or get different input and make those changes. But I personally think if you were feeling that way, I think just from, like your own peace of mind, I think that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, and if you need help with pre-orders, just come into my podcast group and we'll just all share it like crazy because I got a really good community of people that just share on top of buying books. But yeah, like so if you're worried about the pre-orders, don't be. We'll just help you. I've helped a few friends like Scott Palmer. I think it was the one that had a lot of issues. Like he lost like I think like 95 or 98. It's like Amazon pulled his book down within a week and a half of when it was supposed to release, and then everybody was really good in the indie community and popped off. I think he was up to almost 300 within like 8 or 9 days. So, but yeah, I think it's smart that you were like, I need to fix these things and go from there. I've rarely seen people do that and regret it even just from like a writing standpoint. So I think that's really smart. But I think it just shows good business acumen, which I think you also need to have, right, as an indie author or indie creator. So I think that's really smart. You got to tell me about this magic system if you can, if it's not spoilers. Like what can these people do in terms of this planet and these sorcerers? Like that just sounds awesome.
So I guess it's, as I sort of mentioned, on my magical planet, you have a magic field rather than a magnetic field. So the idea is that in the air, there's this magical power sort of circling the whole planet. And, and people who are native to Dunia, anybody can tap into this magic field. And I suppose to describe what it's like, it's almost a little bit like maybe like the Force in Star Wars to an extent. In that it's just kind of like a power. And the way I describe my sorcerers using the magic is that they pull the magic into their core, so they gather it and sort of bring it in, and they sort of feel it in the air, and they gather it in the core, and they're able to concentrate it as a power, and then they can project it out through their hands. So that magic might take the form of like a magical bolt of power to attack something, like blow up a building or something. Or it might take the form of like a little ball of burning blue light, which you might need to light the sky, when it's dark at night. But they can also do things like use this magic as kind of like a force to manipulate how people think. And so, for example, it can't make you invisible in my sort of system, but it can kind of make people not notice you, which is kind of like the same in that you're there. It's just it kind of like messes the mind a little bit. And it can do things like make people believe any truths that are told. And it can do some limited mind manipulation without, full on sort of mind control. So that's kind of what it can do. It's kind of like a force. And as I sort of mentioned, the natives, there are sort of sorcerers who are natives on Dunia, but they have to like train their entire life and really, really study it to become even half decent and have a little bit of magic. Whereas if you come from Earth, you've got such a natural magical potential that you just become like an uber sorcerer really quickly because you're just super powerful. But then still, for certain kinds of magic, it requires an awful lot of skill. So even if you're really powerful, you still can't do certain things like healing magic, for example. So I mentioned sort of healing magic, power doesn't help you be a healer because you've really got to understand anatomy and what it is you're fixing inside the body in order to be able to manipulate the magic to do it. So that's less about power and more about skill. So that's kind of how it works, I guess.
That's super cool. I love it because like if you're going from like I don't know, what I consider like a more traditional, I don't know, setting and like for like like where it's like, like D&D where it's like sorcerer, wizard, like that kind of thing. It's cool because like I was always like Forgotten Realms, I was like, how does it really work? Like, because like a sorcerer could naturally do things, but then a wizard has to study. And I don't know, it's like it was always there were always questions that pop up, right? Like when I was younger and reading them at like 14, I'm like, oh cool, this is awesome. But then now as I'm older, I'm like, wait, like how does this magic system work? And there were like questions that like, never really get answered. And I don't know, you're like, well, why can you do something, but then I can't, And I don't know, like the wizards in that setting always like everybody was like studying or doing this to get power, but then sorcerers were just kind of like awesome and we're like force users. I don't know, but there was always like these questions. So I like that, that you have people from Earth are more, that like sorcerer level power and could do, that. And then I like how your, native Dunians are like more like the wizard base class, but it makes sense. You know what I mean? Like in your setting, it makes more sense than some of these other ones that I felt were just kind of, I don't know, just kind of out there. But I like that because you're like, oh yeah, they're from Earth and they can come here and do. I don't know. I think that's just a much better and more plausible explanation in a fantasy setting than I don't know. Because some books, I love the Forgotten Realms, I love all the authors and everything, but yeah, there's times like from book to book, like there was really no like like set what people could do or not do. And not that I always need that. Like Lord of the Rings, I love and I don't really care too much, but there were just times that, yeah, it was kind of interesting. And I was always, it kind of, now as an older, like author slash like reader, it throws me out of some of the stories, if that makes sense. So I wish that they had kind of talked a little bit more and aligned themselves, but I like how you did that. That's really cool. Um, I know we talked about world building quite a bit, so that's okay. But I'm really curious, and especially with like your relaunch and everything, what sort of goals do you have, in terms of relaunching like this series, like this trilogy? Sorry, like what's like your main goal, would you say?
What my personal goal, I suppose I just want the stories to be read, I guess. So in terms of that's my primary motivation for writing, which was why I was so keen to get the first book right, because I knew if the first book wasn't right, they wouldn't read the other five books.
Yeah.
And I've already written all six books. So they're all sat there waiting to be released. And I just recently asked a question on Twitter about rapid release. And interestingly, a lot of people didn't think it was that good an idea, but that's very much a different topic.
That is really
So
interesting. I would totally disagree, but and so
I
would a
know.
lot
I
of
mean,
people.
I mean, personally, I love. I don't like to approach a book if I know the sequels aren't out because I don't want to wait for them. If I get to the end of the book, I'm like, I want the next book now, but I don't know. That's a separate issue. So yeah, so for my own set of goals is that I want this book to be good, and I want people to enjoy it. And for me, it's less about the money, and it's more just about creating pleasure for other people. And I think that's ultimately why I write, because I love creating things. So every time my kids have a birthday, I always make a really sort of extravagant novelty cake because I just love creating a really nice cake. And, I've done sort of painting in the past and I've done a lot of property development because I love sort of renovating things and creating something that's nice and pretty and all that kind of stuff. And books sort of sit right in there. So
Yeah,
if
yeah,
I can create pleasure for other people, then, I'm happy.
it's cool. I always love like even this podcast. Like I go on, my son will be listening to like the Wiggles or something, watching the YouTube, and then because I'm logged into my channel, right, like my podcast channel, and then I don't know, like he gets tired or something, and every so often I'll just like get lost in like I'll start going over my channel because then it pops up with like one of my videos or something. And then sometimes when I'm feeling unaccomplished, I go through and I'll like put the display down and I'll go through all four seasons of 52 episodes. And it's so cool to think like I just talked to you for an hour or so, right? And it's like I always forget how many authors or creatives or directors or artists or game developers that I've talked to over the last like almost like 5 years now. And it's wild to think like we're just having a conversation, but then, putting the thumbnail up on there, it's almost like having your book thumbnail, but in the podcast world, and I'm like, it's cool to create something out of nothing is what it feels like. So for me, I'm like, oh, I just can't. That's like also like last week I did that again is like to get myself ramped up for like the last few episodes of this season so I could then get into season five. And I've just had so many amazing guests. My wife's like, I don't think you can stop. I'm like, no, I can't. I'm like, I've had so many great conversations with so many people. It's just got me jazzed to write this summer. But I like she's like, I feel like when you do get this novella published, because I have like a trilogy of three, she's like, it's gonna feel so good. She's like, it's gonna feel like podcasting, but then like times 10.
Mm,
And like seeing that because like literally, right, you're especially when you hold your book, right? I think that's what's so magical is I love when people, show their paperback or their hardcover because it's like you literally took nothing and then like made a thing. I don't know. It's just always like the coolest thing. So I think that's
yeah.
a really, really neat goal. So that's really cool. And that's why people always ask me that. So I actually said the same thing when on a podcast they asked me. I was like, I just want people to read my stuff, and like I was like, I don't even really care if they like it. I was like, I want them to like it, but at the end of the day, I just want them to be interested to read and to give it a
Yeah.
shot. So I think that makes total sense. That's really cool. Well, what goals do you have in terms of your characters within this trilogy?
So the sort of character, the two main characters are Emma and Tom, and for Emma, it's basically she goes through a whole sort of journey through the three books and it's all about her realizing her potential and also doing her duty because at the start she's very much a normal woman. Her job's just a research analyst. She sort of works on her own. She doesn't manage anybody. She's not a leader. And then she's told that you actually queen and you're in charge or should be in charge of a whole country. And she's like, what? And it's like, and she has a lot of doubt along the way about herself and her ability to do this. But she's, such a sort of fighter that she sort of pushes herself on, and she very much grows as a character. And her goal ultimately is to become this queen, and she's very cognizant of that. And so I think she does what she thinks she needs to do in order to develop herself to become this queen. And whenever she has a wobble, and whenever she's not sure, her husband's there, Tom's there to help her. And sort of leading on to sort of Tom, I mean, if you sort of think, well, why would Tom give up his home planet and follow his wife to another planet, an entirely another world where he's sort of second to his wife and the rest of it. And Tom's motivation for doing that is he just wants the adventure. I mean,
Mm.
and he just wants to explore, and he joined the army, so he's in the the British Army in his at the start, and he joined it because he wanted the adventure. And I'm in the army as well as a reservist. I've been doing it for 22 years, so I kind of have sort of a fairly good idea what sort of military life and military careers are like. And you join it with all these amazing ideas of how exciting it's going to be, and then realize actually it's just mostly paperwork. um so and I think that's Tom to an extent. Is a little bit sort of, it's not quite what he hoped. And then he has this opportunity to go to the planet, and then they told him, you can be this sorcerer. And he's like, I could be a sorcerer and married to a queen. This sounds awesome. And so he goes there, and obviously initially, because he's come from this army background, he's a little bit arrogant, he's a little bit full of himself, he's just sort of around about turning 30, and he's been doing well so far in life. And but underneath it all, he absolutely sort of dotes in his wife, and he just wants to sort of help her. So he's not trying to like overbear her, but he has to kind of learn as he goes through, because he's kind of arrogant and immature, and he's been in the army. So a lot of things have been done for him. When you live in that world, you don't need to stand on your own 2 feet to an extent, with certainly a lot of your sort of life administration and stuff. And then he goes to this place where he's completely out of his comfort zone. So, he doesn't know how to ride a horse and wield a sword. He knows how to fire rifles and drive cars and stuff. So, and when he comes across native Dunians who know how to do all that stuff, he kind of feels a little bit emasculated, I guess. And so he kind of ends up with a bit of a chip on his shoulder. And it's about him coming to terms with that and learning to develop in this new world, while at the same time trying to be strong for his wife so that she can overcome her doubts as well. So the two of them very much grow as characters throughout the trilogy until they're able to get to the point where, she's a queen leading an army against the enemy, and Tom's there with all his magic, sort of fighting the magical battles. So, as part of the sort of strategic approach and being grown up and working with everybody else and all the rest of it. So that's their sort of journey and their sort of goals as they progress.
That's really cool. Well, so for her, like it reminds me of what I loved about the movie. Like I know it didn't do well, but like Jupiter Ascending with Mila Kunis and Channing Tatum, and I think the two things that got really well done were like their relationship, and also just like Mila Kunis's character, like she's like a I don't remember. She's like a princess from like the Intergalactic Empire, right? And then like people find her and like Channing Tatum's characters got like protect her or whatever. But like to see like their growth together, I like was really disappointed that the movie didn't do better because it was like supposed to be like a trilogy. And what I love that is that there was so much room for Mila Kunis's character to grow. And it really stunk because then when you heard about what, like they were trying to do with her character, I'm like, oh, this is like trying to do like early Princess Leia stuff and just make her like even better than Channing Tatum's character in the first movie. Because even like at the end, like she doesn't really like need him as much, to protect her, but she needs him more in the relationship. I was like, oh, this was really good. I was like so disappointed, but I love the fact that like they really took like that fish out of water aspect. And that's what it sounds really similar like for both of them. And I just felt like the character growth was awesome in the movie. So that really it makes me feel like you did this in book form for the characters I liked and like their relationship. So that makes me really, really excited, even more excited to read the trilogy. So that's like super, super cool. Now, these are some questions that I had somebody ask me a while back, and I've just kind of tweaked to the same question depending on kind of what people's like main genre or subgenres are. So, if you could be transported to one world or realm, which setting would it be and why?
It's gonna have to be the planet I've created. So how good
That's
to
a
do
good
that.
answer. Nobody
I
said
suppose,
that yet.
yeah.
Shame on you guys.
So
That's a
I
good
guess
answer.
earlier, I mean, the whole reason I wrote the story is because I couldn't do it myself, so I sent my characters. I just think it'd be awesome to go there because I'm from Earth, so I'd have all this superpower, and I'd just like
Yeah,
to this massively awesome, powerful sorcerer, and just do loads of cool stuff, which I think would be awesome. And I guess there's also a degree of the idea of the romanticized vision of this sort of medieval setting where people ride around on horses and it's all sort of nice castles and swordsmen and all that kind of stuff. I don't know.
awesome. I
So,
love horses. Like I've always wanted to like I had some neighbors at my parents and I live in a different state now, but like they'll go by the same family lives there, but now they take their grandkids instead of like the kids we used to play with like their parents, right? And but it's so cool. Like my son is just like enamored with horses, and I just remember being at my parents like because we had lived in the city at first, moved out there when I was 4, so a little bit older than my son. But like his face, he's just like, oh. And I'm like, I always wanted to be a cowboy personally because I just wanted to be with my horse and like go explore and stuff. So like sure, I love science fiction. I would have also liked to been Han Solo, but I love horses, so I hope that he loves them as much as I do. Because there's like a new riding place like right past our town. So I'm like, oh please, 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 because then I could get to ride too, at the same time. So I totally understand that aspect. I think that'd be really neat. Well, that's a fantastic answer. I can't believe shame on you guys. Nobody said that in like a season about a season worth of me asking these questions. Like
that's very
everybody's
surprising.
it's so funny. Yeah, you figured that'd be like the first thing people would say because you spent all this time and energy and the world. So you figure people would say that first. So that's like really, really funny. That's awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to everything. I got like everything just like listed. I have like a TBR and then I got stuff that's like upcoming. So I have you in my list that's upcoming. So I'm like really, really excited. Do you know when you're going to re-release yet or no? Or have you not shared that with people yet or?
Yeah, I'm not certain. I'm hoping it's going to be this year.
Got it. Okay.
So, I've had the sequel. I mean, all the other books are pretty much there. They're all done. I'm just getting line and copy edits done on a couple of the other books, but they are all done. The book that needs the work is the Queen of Vaughan, or whatever I change its name to. But even that doesn't need massive work. It's mostly just about deleting stuff and tweaking things and just adjusting some of the scenes. So Emma's maybe taking a little bit more of a lead and maybe just trimming a few bits out. That's the primary change I'm making to it. I have made a start on it. It's just a case of how much time I get to do it. And
Yeah.
when I've done it, I'm just what I'll probably do is try and find some victims to give it a read before I do anything else, and then see what they say and see if it does need any more work.
Yeah.
Because I've been in that position where I thought, yeah, I've done everything that the editors have said and the beat readers have said, so it must be fine now, and then only to realize that it wasn't. So, yeah. So I think that I'll have finished making my tweaks on that book in probably in a few weeks' time, certainly by the end of the summer. And after that, it's a case of getting people to read it, seeing what they think, making any more
Yeah.
change. And then I may well need to shell out more money and get another line of copy edit. Much as I'd like to avoid that, I probably will need to do that. And then once it's ready and it's polished, only then will I set a date, because what I don't want to be doing, like I've done before,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
rushing to the publishing date,
Yep.
committing to one when I know I'm not 100% certain I'm going to be ready.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yep.
yeah. So I'll say this year, and then I don't know. As for the other books, I just can't decide how soon after the first to release them, because they'll all be ready once the first one's out. And I could release them, one a day thereafter if I wanted to. It's just trying to figure out that interval, which I'm just not sure about.
I'll be honest, I've done a lot of research on this because I plan on rapid releasing my novellas and then my actual book one for my urban fantasy series. And I at least like it's changed a little bit since the pandemic. So before the pandemic, it was like anywhere from really like 3 months to 5 months was like generally what they were saying. Now, because of whatever's changed, now it's like has tended from, and I keep like anytime someone publishes stats or anything on this, I keep looking. So now it's like saying like anywhere from or sorry, what used to be 4 to 6 months, now it's shorter. I think that's because more people were writing after the pandemic. So now it's tend to be like 3 to 5 months. So that's like what I think I'm gonna do. My novellas like 3 months apart. I have a new cover reveal for my first novella, and then I got like my other two, and then I got my actual book one. So like that's what my friend's like, man, you're gonna be like almost set for the whole year. I'm like, yeah, like all of next year pretty much. But like that's like what I've talked to a lot of authors about this too. That's the 3 to 5 seems to be the one that seems to do the best recently for people. But yeah, that's just my advice. But that's what I plan on doing because that's just what people keep telling me seems to work. I've had a lot of people on this podcast that have done the same thing. So, but yeah, it was really interesting to research, and it was so weird to see the change after the pandemic. I don't know because everybody for years, like Lindsay Broker's podcast with Joe Lalo, everybody said 4 to 6 months, every 4 to 6 months, and then now it's like it seems like more books are out. I think that's got to be the thing. So I think now there's just so much more to see, and obviously it's like algorithms and stuff are just hard to get into now unless you're paying. So I think that's another, like huge dent in it, which makes it, you got to release more, right, in a shorter amount of time, even if it is a couple. Because then you're thinking, right, if you go from 4 to 6 and then, you shorten, a month per 4 projects, right? So all of a sudden you're like, that's 4 extra months, right? That people are, don't have to wait for you that are seeing your stuff. So within the same year. So ends up being really interesting. But yeah, I'd be really interested to see, to have you back on and to see like when you do release, like how that works for you. This is always kind of like my journal, so to speak, to kind of get little snapshots of everybody's, experiences and stuff just to try and see what's working and, maybe we could figure it out together, like that kind of thing. But do you have any other news updates, current projects, anything like that you can share with us?
No, well, my main effort at the moment is just trying to get this trilogy sorted, but I do have another book that I did wrote, and it's called Magic Breakers, and that's
Ooh,
just kind of sat on my hard drive at the minute. That is the first book of a completely different series set in a completely
oh,
different
cool.
world. And that is one I need to look more tweets on it, but I'm going to I have attempted to query it and get a traditional deal on that one.
Interesting.
I might do some more work on it and have another go on it. But yeah, that's just sat there. And then I think other than that, once I've got these 6 books out, what I'm going to do, I don't know. I'm not 100% decided whether I'm going to focus on a sequel or a prequel or
Oh
or
yeah,
just
yeah,
do
yeah.
something completely different and go back to my Magic Breaker series. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just going to get these ones out and then yeah, try and do some marketing and see if I can get my book into the hands of my readers
Yeah, yeah.
enjoyed by people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's hard too, right? Because, like I'm hoping that you just boom, like you release, re-release everything. I hope it just takes off for you. I'm hoping, and then that's a whole different decision, right? Is that, then that determines, what you are doing, right? Most likely. So it's always interesting to see when those things unfold. But that's what I'm hoping for you, and that's what I'm shooting for. So, but you already got one resold or pre-ordered, so. I'm really excited to check this out. I loved the covers and I don't know, everything just sounded really awesome. So I'm really, really excited to see what you do with it. I love the original trilogy name, but I actually like the new one too. So I'm like kind of 50-50. I don't know, but I did like Homecoming, but I also like that one too. And just the concept, right, of like I'm gonna take back the throne just sounds really cool. So I think that's really neat. But thank you so much, Charlotte, for coming on. This has been great. You really got my writer brain thinking. I have like 3 more days of work and then I can go back to writing. And I've just been stewing over here. But it's a great stew that all of you authors and creators have helped me create. So I'm really, really excited to think about a couple things next couple days and get back to my writing sprint. So I really appreciate it. If you need anything in the meantime, or when you're getting closer to release, just let me know, and we can hop back on if you want to do like a live launch or something like that. We can set something up like that too. I did that for a friend of mine. I got another one. I think the first week in October. So if you want to do something like that, just keep it in mind. We could do it on a weekend or something, and do a good date and time for you or something like that. But yeah, we'd love to help you out as much as we can. If you're on Facebook, feel free. I can send you the podcast group, or you can just send stuff to me. A lot of people just send stuff to me and I just share it, if whether it's like newsletter stuff or different links or something like that. We got like 2,400 people right now. We've been climbing. We almost doubled this year so far, which has been really nice. But yeah, if you need anything at all, just feel free to let me know and we'll get it out there for you. So.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. For those of you watching or listening, I just want to remind you that whether you have come before or you're new, you can find Charlotte's book and social links in the description down below anywhere we're watching or listening to this podcast. Once you go to those links and you buy the books or the content, please make sure that you are in fact reviewing those products. That helps people the most. And like we've talked on here this whole last year, algorithms have been real tough. So those are the things that really help, particularly for authors and creators, to get back up in the algorithm, as those ratings, not necessarily even the stars, but just that things are rated. So obviously we want you to rate things really well, but having ratings period really just helps people to get in those algorithms. Charlotte, thank you so much. If you need anything, like I said, you just let me know. But other than that, I hope you have a good rest of the day and good luck with everything.
And you too. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'll see you later. Have a good
All
one.
right. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.